It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, folks, got a ton of great herd mentality items to dig into today. As you may be aware of, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, I'm still in Western New York. Still at Aunt Karen's house here in Western New York. Big thanks to her for allowing us to take over her home and take over her kitchen as the podcast recording studio for the week. Excited to take in practice on Thursday and, of course, the scrimmage on Friday here before I leave town on Saturday. But it's been a great week, and it's only halfway over, and it's been so fun to bring you all of this firsthand content this week. But with the team off on Wednesday, it's a great opportunity for us to have a herd mentality episode, and that's what we're going to do here today. So let's get started. The first one comes from John. John says, like many, I want Kaiir Elam to win the CB2 job. I have a bit of a different take, though. Sean McDermott is big on the underdog and the every man overcoming odds. He is big on steady and reliable. I think this is a blind spot at times. Couldn't having someone not named Kaiir Elam win the job be a case of letting steady and reliable be the enemy of great? I saw Kaiir play. I watched the film. He held his own. He has the traits to be great. I know one thing. I can live with Benford, but I do not need to see even one more snap of Dane Jackson at CB1. Come on. Well, let's talk about it. I know that there's a lot of folks out there that want to see Kaiir Elam win this job, but it is absolutely a three-way battle between Dane Jackson, Kaiir Elam, and Christian Benford. And I can appreciate the angle here that John brings up that, look, McDermott's leading into steady and reliable. That's kind of been a tendency of his throughout the years, and him doing that is taking away the opportunity for Kaiir Elam to grow with this defense and get playing time. And here's what I'll say. I'm with you in that I want Kaiir Elam to win this job. I think he's the highest upside player. He's the first rounder. They didn't pick him in the first round to not start over Dane Jackson and Christian Benford. But I think in reality, all three of these guys have shown enough that they deserve to be in the mix. And I think for as much as I want Kaiir Elam to win this job, even more than that, I want the Buffalo Bills to be a team that actually does have competition. And that just because you're a first-round pick doesn't mean that you're guaranteed anything. And that if you are a sixth or a seventh-round pick, that you do have a chance. And so I like those things. And so I'll say this. Let's let it play out. Let's see what it looks like. I do have a part of me that thinks that this could be a platoon situation where all three of these guys get regular playing time and that it could be game plan specific. But the good news is the Bills do have, I think, 4 viable starting outside corners. And we can celebrate that for a moment because there's been a lot of years where I thought it was Trey White, and I am concerned about everything else. So there's good options. Let's let it play out. The plan is obviously for Kaiir Elam to be the starter. They wouldn't have picked him in the first round if that wasn't going to be the case. But maybe it's just not that time yet. And maybe he's not a starter until next season. And I think that's probably okay, folks. Year 3, he's still a very, very young football player. And we want this to happen, but it needs to happen at the right time. And so maybe it sounds like I defended McDermott, but what I really wanted to do is just bring some more perspective to this thought process, John, that I think you and a lot of people have. It's a good competition. Elam is clearly the highest upside player, but let's let it play out. And even if it doesn't happen this year, it doesn't dismiss the idea that Kaiir Elam still can't develop into a high-impact player that signs a second contract and pairs with Tre'Davious White for a bunch of years to give this team a really high-quality pair of starting outside corners. For now, I think they just got to sort some things out. Let's let it play out. And the book's not written on any of these players yet. So let's see what happens. The next question is from Mikey, and this is another Kaiir Elam question. Mikey says, for an organization who says they are always looking at the now but keeps the future in sight, how does giving first-team reps to Dane Jackson day in and day out, who is on a one-year deal over Benford and Elam, who have multiple years left and are supposed to be the future of the position, make any sense? From everything I watched last year, Benford and Elam were every bit as good as Dane was, and by the end of the season, I thought both outplayed Dane. Let me say this, because I obviously can tell here through these questions and, you know, the subtext conversations that I have with people and being engaged with social media and kind of the pulse of what the fans are thinking with this team. A lot of momentum for Elam, folks. I know you guys want Elam. Here's the angle that I want to bring up with this right now. I think that there's going to be contributing factors and potentially critical factors, deciding factors in this CB2 race that have nothing to do with what any of us can see and observe. We can watch practice and say, yeah, it's close. We can watch the game film last year and say, yeah, it's close, and maybe you can make an argument that Elam was the best one. But I think what's going to go into this decision just as much as what we can see through practice and what we've seen in games is everything else. How guys prepare, how guys take care of themselves outside the facility, off the field. What are they like in the classroom? What's their football intelligence? How are they taking what they're told to do in the classroom and applying that on the football field? I think we have to be willing to acknowledge that there are contributing factors and critical factors in this decision that, you know what, we're just not going to have all the information. And we can all have our opinions. I've said it out loud multiple times. I want Kaiir Elam to be the starting CB2. I want that. But I just feel a burden right now to bring up all these different angles that we have to be mindful of so that we can have the right expectation and the right mindset as we approach observing this competition playing out and ultimately a decision being made, and also being mindful of, hey, the decision could be a platoon. They've done it before. They've done it in 2 different years. The Kevin Johnson, Levi Wallace year and the Josh Norman, Levi Wallace year. Last year they rotated. It's not outside the realm of possibility that all 3 of these guys get reasonable starting playing time in 2023. The next one here comes from Ben, also one very similar to one sent in by Matthew. Ben says, you've mentioned McDermott wants the green dot to be the middle linebacker. Will this decision impact the ability to mix in dime packages? Can you talk through the logistics of calling the plays if the green dot middle linebacker is subbed out for multiple consecutive plays? Great question here, Ben. And yes, Sean McDermott has told us out loud that he wants for the middle linebacker to have the green dot, but he's also open to doing whatever is best for the football team. And I found a great article written by The Ringer from a couple of years ago, I think at the end of 2022, where they were talking about the evolution of the green dot and what it means. And one bit of information that I found very interesting from reading that is the last couple of years, we've seen an uptick in non-middle linebackers having the green dot. In fact, in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, there were 3 teams that had a non-middle linebacker. In 2022, that doubled up to 6. And I don't know, what that's going to look like moving forward, but we're seeing that happening and we're seeing that increase. And I understand logically why it would be the middle linebacker, and I think it still probably will be the middle linebacker for the Buffalo Bills, but teams are becoming more receptive to this, and we've also heard Sean McDermott say that he is receptive to this. And that doesn't answer your question. Your question is, what are the logistics if the middle linebacker comes off the field and he's a green dot player? Well, the rule is that you just can have one green dot player on the field. So if the starting middle linebacker comes off the field and he's the green dot player, someone else is going to have to come onto the field with a green dot, or there's going to be have to be some helmet shifting. which is totally possible. So I think that there's a lot of options here. And I think it's important for us to not have a fixed mindset on, hey, it has to be the middle linebacker, because teams are evolving, and it's just as simple as switching helmets for the necessary plays to make sure that you only have one green dot on the field on any given play. So a fascinating layer to this offseason, but I think it's important for us to know that as Sean McDermott works through this and makes a decision. All right, folks, a bunch more to get to here in just a moment. First, I need to tell you about FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can bet on anything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's simply no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, let's keep it moving here. The next one today comes from Chad. Chad says, you've talked about how the offensive line is seemingly better going into 2023 now that Roger Saffold is gone, and with Connor McGovern and just more stability as well, and Aaron Cromer going into his second season with the guys. You also mentioned that having a new tight end like Dalton Kincaid opens the door for 12 personnel, which could also allow for James Cook to line up as a receiver. This will stress the defense in order to make sure everyone is covered. My question is, do you think this will actually open things up more and we will see more plays where Josh Allen runs the ball, since there may be more gaps in the trenches? Do you see this as a possibility, or do you feel like there will be an insignificant change into how he runs the ball and how often? Curious as to your thoughts. It's a great question here from you, Chad, and I can certainly see this being a yes. Like, if you just take it down to the pillars of what you're saying, more gaps on the field because of 12 personnel. Running the football is about a math advantage. You want to have more numbers versus theirs. You introduce extra gaps, which makes it harder to defend. And when you run the football with your quarterback, you are literally playing football with 11 players and just making it really hard for the defense to account for anything, for everything. Well, yeah, anything and everything. But will the Bills do that? I think some, and I think you've seen some of Josh Allen's best quarterback design runs come when they introduce those extra gaps. And so I think there's a lot of good to this idea. But in this world where we hear so much about Josh Allen, stylistically, how he plays football, taking hits, you hear it every offseason from Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. Are they going to put him in more of those opportunities to take hits? And I've certainly spoken a lot on this podcast about how quarterbacks actually don't get injured running the football. They get injured in the pocket when they can't brace themselves for hits. Like, that's how quarterbacks get injured. There's significant data that tells us that. But it's also just hits, right? You want to reduce the amount of hits. And when you run the football intentionally with Josh Allen, you're signing yourself up for hits. And so for all the good that could come of that, Chad, I think those would be good, effective plays that lean into the strengths of your football players, which is good offense, that's good scheme, that's good strategy. Are you going to want to willingly increase the amount of hits Josh Allen takes? So that's the big wet blanket over this entire conversation. So a lot of layers to it. I think Josh Allen ultimately runs the football about 100 times in 2023. Next one here comes from Frank. Frank says, has anyone stood out to you at training camp in a way that surprised you? It's a good question here from Frank. Obviously, having the opportunity to take in the last couple of practices has put me in a position to answer this question, and it's a good time for the question. I think there's three players that I think surprised me in a way that I wasn't expecting. The first one, I'll go with Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis has shown me more in these 2 days as a route runner, as a short area route runner, than I've seen in a while that's impressed me. So I think Gabe Davis showing me a bit more in that capacity is a good thing that surprised me. I think Taylor Rapp has surprised me. He's such an active player, very, very athletic, always around the football, plays with a lot of confidence. I thought I would like him. I like him more than I thought after watching him for a couple of days. And then I'll also say Cam Lewis. Cam Lewis didn't have a lot of great moments last year in some of his opportunities, but he's been great for the 2 practices that I've seen, showing versatility, being physical, playing the ball, and we know that he can help on special teams. And so I've gained more and more appreciation for Cam Lewis after observing him for 2 days at practice. The next one here comes from Sean. Sean says, I personally see dramatic similarities between Dalton Kincaid and San Diego Chargers great Antonio Gates. Can you please compare both players and let us know if this comparison is a potential reality for the Bills? All right, Sean, I really like this, but I also really don't like it all at the same time. We're invoking a very special player here in Antonio Gates, one of the greatest tight ends in the history of the NFL. The most receiving touchdowns for a tight end in the history of the NFL. Top 3 in receptions and receiving yards among tight ends in the history of the NFL. And so I am always going to be very, 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 very cautious when I invoke an all-time great, a legend of the game, a guy that really redefined the position in a lot of ways, to a guy that's never taken a snap in an NFL game. And so I had to get that disclaimer out of the way before I go any further. I'm always hesitant to do this. Bringing in those all-time great names and comparing them to rookies is tough for me. But whenever we talk comparisons, or at least whenever I talk comparisons, I never discuss comparisons through the lens of career arc. I think that is setting yourself up for disillusionment, right? Like, people are just not, that's not the right way to do it. That's just not the right way to do it. When I talk comparisons, I want to talk about stylistic, how they play the game, how they win. And when you laser in on that, just stylistically, how they play the game and why they have success, I think that you can find similarities between Dalton Kincaid and Antonio Gates. Both were very young to football when they came to the NFL, right? Basketball background, and then become NFL players after really not playing a ton of football. Now, there's other similarities with how they play in terms of athleticism. I think their body compositions are pretty similar. I think they're athletically very similar. And I think when you consider the body control that you see from both guys, the hands are both, they're outstanding for both guys. The route running, the ability to just naturally establish leverage at the catch point, which kind of stems from that basketball background, you can definitely find stylistic comparisons. But I am not going to sit on this podcast here today and tell you that Dalton Kincaid is destined to become top 3 all time in the history of the NFL for tight ends when it comes to receptions and yards and, potentially be the all-time leader in touchdowns. Would I sign up for that right now? Absolutely. But I am not in good conscience going to steer you in that direction. But I will acknowledge that there are plenty of stylistic similarities between Dalton Kincaid and Antonio Gates that should get you very, very excited. And I'll tell you what, I've watched Dalton Kincaid for two days of practice, and I think he's a real deal. Everything that we've talked about with him as a player is evident already, right? 6 practices into his NFL career, you're seeing the receiving upside that we've been so excited for in discussing Dalton Kincaid over the last several months. Smooth, natural. It's not too big for him. He doesn't seem overwhelmed. You just get a sense listening to him as well that he's got the right mindset to go in to his career and really hit the ground running. And then you couldn't be more thrilled for the opportunity that he has in Buffalo with an established organization and where they are in their life cycle as a team with a quarterback like Josh Allen that can really maximize what he does as a receiver. So I like where everything's trending. I'm excited for Dalton Kincaid. And yeah, there are a lot of similarities between how he plays the game to how all-time great tight end Antonio Gates played the game. All right, folks, a bunch more to get to here right after a very, very quick break. All right, folks, we've got some more to get to here today, but first I would like to tell you about and invite you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community, something we started offering a few months ago, and it has been awesome. And so if you want to join, there's a link in the show notes for today and every day that you can click on and sign up. So if you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on whatever podcast medium you prefer, click on the show notes. You'll see a link to join. Here's what you get. Well, first of all, my favorite part is the one-on-one text conversations with me. I spend time every day texting back and forth with Bills fans, and it's been awesome to learn more about you guys, answer your questions in real time, share more of myself with you. That is definitely my favorite part, having that direct line to you guys having a direct line to me, and we get to talk Bills football, just not only on this podcast with me talking to you, but in the text messages. I love it. Talking Bills football is what I do, and so being able to text with you guys is awesome. You also get priority when it comes to herd mentality. You get access to some exclusive content. I send out regular mass text messages that share my thoughts on the team. You get my first reaction to all major Bills news. So check it out, the Locked On Bills subtext community. There is a link in today's show notes to join, and everybody gets a free 2-week trial. And most importantly, nothing changes with the normal delivery of this podcast. It is simply an extra layer of engagement for anybody who might want it. The next one here today comes from Kyle. Kyle says, I had a thought on potential trade candidates that I wanted to throw your way. Now that the pads are on, it seems like I saw Epenesa's name coming up again as having another solid training camp. From what you're seeing at camp so far, do you think his performance or even just some of the perceived hype has increased his potential trade value over Basham? I recall these two being potential trade candidates earlier in the offseason and wanted to get your opinion if the gap between them has widened or narrowed. I don't think the Bills are going to trade A.J. Epinesa. I think they're going to want to enjoy A.J. Epinesa this year for them. Contract years, see what you can get, and enjoy the depth that you have on the edge. You haven't invested all of this in the edge to start trading away players and now limit what you have at the edge, especially with Von Miller working back from injury. And A.J. Epinesa is getting the first-team reps opposite of Greg Rousseau right now with Von Miller not available. And so I just don't think that the Bills, a team that is a Super Bowl contender, is right now thinking about trading away their starting defensive end. Does he have more value than Basham? Yes, but the Bills aren't a seller, right? You want to sell some of your assets that you can't roster, but you're not thinking about not rostering A.J. Epinesa. I think the more logical player to trade would be Boogie Basham, but maybe you don't want to trade any of these guys. Right now, if I were to tell you what I think the order at defensive end is based on watching practice for 2 days, I would say it's Greg Rousseau's number 1, A.J. Epinesa is number 2, Leonard Floyd is 3, Boogie Basham is 4, Shaq Lawson is 5, and Shane Ray is 6. You're probably only going to roster 4 or 5. And if you roster 4, you got some players there on the outside looking in that typically would make the team. And then what happens when Von Miller comes back? I think the X factor in this conversation is Jordan Phillips. Is Jordan Phillips ready for week 1, or is he going to start the season on the PUP list? If that's true, I think the Bills will roster 4 defensive tackles and 5 defensive ends. If Jordan Phillips is ready to go, I think there's a chance that they roster 5 defensive tackles and 4 defensive ends to start the year. So I think Jordan Phillips is a key piece of this conversation. But I don't know that the Bills are going to be interested in trading away A.J. Epinesa. He's a starter for them right now and probably will be until Von Miller comes back. And then from there, I think you want to enjoy him as a depth player that had 6.5 sacks for you in year 3 last year that's looking for a contract. I'd enjoy those contributions for myself. And if I'm going to trade away a defensive end, I'm going to be more interested in a guy like Boogie Basham, who just hasn't shown as much. And I recently studied both of their film. I've watched them both at practice, and I think Epinesa is just a better player. Next one here comes from Roaming Buffalonian, who says, wanted to get your pre-draft thoughts on Jace Sternberger before he was drafted by Green Bay. I personally loved him coming out and used a first-round dynasty fantasy pick on him. Sadly, he never panned out for some reason. What were your thoughts on him and who he was in college? What are your thoughts about what he could become in the NFL, and if you think he could beat out Quentin Morris for tight end 3 despite Morris being a 4-phase special teamer? I was a big fan of Jay Sternberger coming out of Texas A&M. I went back and looked at my rankings. He was the 50th player on my board and a mid-day 2 grade. I really liked the receiving skill. And I love that he was an ascending player, kind of had an interesting path. Was at Kansas for a little bit, then went to JUCO, then went to Texas A&M and became a very, very productive receiving tight end in college. And the reality is receiving tight ends in college are typically not that productive. And Jay Sternberger was productive. He was athletic. I saw natural hands and route running ability. I thought he'd be a good starter in the NFL. And I thought Green Bay was going to be a great spot for him. But obviously it never came together. And that's a situation where they've needed tight end production. They've drafted several other tight ends in recent years with high picks since drafting Jay Sternberger, and it's just not really clicking for him. And then he was on another team last year or a couple years ago and didn't really stick there either. So I'm really concerned that there's been a couple of teams that have said no to him already. And he's signed just a few days before training camp, right? That's not necessarily good indicators that he's going to wind up being a meaningful player for the Bills. But I can tell you that I love the player I watched at Texas A&M, and I think he's been good in practice. I think he's made some tough catches. He's looked a lot better than Joel Wilson. He's not getting the same opportunities as a Quentin Morris is right now. And I don't think he's going to provide the same special teams contributions. So there's a lot that goes into this, but if the Bills were to roster 4 tight ends, I think he can get in that conversation. But at a minimum, I think you're going to love putting him on the practice squad, trying to develop him for a little bit and really making sure that the bottom of your tight end depth chart is strong. And I think that's what Jay Sternberger can give this football team if I'm realistically calibrating my expectations. The next one here comes from Brandon. Brandon says, heard the clip of Dalvin Cook on the Rich Eisen show. I don't think the Bills will pull the trigger on that move. However, it got me thinking, would they consider signing a guy like Kareem Hunt to be another pass-catching running back in the event James Cook goes down? None of the running backs on the roster currently are quality pass-catching running back options. Possibly. I think the good news with the Bills in running back depth is that if they feel like they need to add another one, there's options. J.D. McKissic's out there. Leonard Fournette's out there. Ezekiel Elliott's out there. Kareem Hunt's out there. Other players are going to get cut. The reality with running back production in the NFL is that it's easy to find. And so, Kareem Hunt is obviously a skill set that's intriguing. He's been productive. He does give you exciting pass catching ability. I think Kareem Hunt probably has to come to grips with his own value. Probably views himself as a starting caliber back that's looking for some money. And so he has to come to terms with reality that it's not going to be there for him. But whether it's Kareem Hunt or Duke Johnson or somebody else, I think if the Bills wanted to find a pass-catching back or any depth at running back, the NFL is always brimming with options. And right now is no different. And I think at any point during the season, the Bills will have some veteran options that they could consider if absolutely necessary. And I think that's the unfortunate reality with this entire running back conversation that exists in the NFL right now. The production is too easy to find, and the longevity is bad, and too many guys are getting paid, and it's not working out for the respective teams. And it's putting them in a tough spot. And they're not moving the market like you're seeing at other positions, but it kind of makes sense as to why. And so we'll see how that all sorts itself out. But I don't know that I'm going to get myself to the point where I get concerned about the stable of backs. I think with James Cook, Latavius Murray, and Damian Harris, the Bills are in pretty good shape. They got a speedy young player in Darrington Evans. I don't know. I just don't find myself getting concerned about running back depth at this point in time. And if running back depth did become a concern, there's going to be options that they can sign. So that's my thoughts on that. All right, folks, there you have it. Herd mentality is in the books. A couple things here that I'm looking forward to. Tomorrow, of course, practice in the morning. I'll get you a post-practice podcast early Thursday afternoon. But then don't forget, Thursday night, I'm at Imperial Pizza with Pat Moran. Going to get there around 6:30 or so, be there for a few hours. Come by and say hello. Would love to interact with as many of you as possible. And then, of course, I'll be at the stadium on Friday night for the scrimmage. Can't wait to take that in. And then, of course, give you a post-scrimmage podcast late on Friday night. So don't miss any of that. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow after practice.